Tony Busby, the splashy Texas lawyer who promised he would file more than 100 civil lawsuits against Sean Diddy Combs, who's now in a war with Jay-Z, is facing some serious allegations, both ethically and morally. A former girlfriend and client of his is now suing him, saying he gave her an STD and then used it to blackmail her. We've got the court documents that lay out the very. Tony Busby has practically become a household name in the legal world these days, right? As he makes it known that he is going up against some of the richest and most powerful people in the music industry. He has filed more than a dozen lawsuits on behalf of John and Jane Does who say that Sean Diddy Combs sexually assaulted them. Some as recently as 2022, others back in the 90s. By the way, talking Sean Combs for a second, he is going to be spending Christmas behind bars as he awaits trial next year on federal charges of sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution. He is maintaining his innocence while he's locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center, the MDC, out in Brooklyn. Now, going back to one of these disturbing lawsuits, we've talked about this a lot, but Busby recently filed this amended complaint naming officially Sean Carter, also known as Jay-Z, as an alleged perpetrator in the rape of a 13-year-old girl 24 years ago. When that news broke, Jay-Z, Roc Nation, Jay-Z's entertainment company, as well as his attorneys, they put out statements condemning Busby's decision to include Jay-Z in this lawsuit because Jay-Z says none of this ever happened. And in fact, Alex Spiro, who is Jay-Z's attorney, is trying to get a judge to throw out the allegations against the music mogul in the lawsuit, saying that Jane Doe is an unreliable narrator and that the claims are flat out lies. In fact, Jane Doe recently appeared for an NBC News interview in which she admitted that some of the details that she had recounted, they might be wrong, or she might have gotten mixed up. And Spiro says that that's not only grounds to dismiss Jay-Z from the complaint, but also to impose sanctions upon Busby for backing her play, for filing this lawsuit. We actually did a whole sidebar on this. I encourage everybody to go check it out. It's on our Law and Crime YouTube page. But today, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about this complaint that was just filed yesterday that accuses Tony Busby of not only ethical violations, moral violations, and they are not only egregious, they are quite salacious. So this suit was filed in New York State court by a Jane Doe who lives in Texas. Busby is licensed to practice in both states. And she accuses him of legal malpractice, saying he failed in his representation of her during her divorce and that he manipulated her private medical information to cover his own misconduct. Busby, though, says this is all part of a smear campaign, so we'll get into it and let's start right now. The complaint begins since 2018, defendant has taken advantage of plaintiff for his own personal gain, but that ends now. The first time the parties met, defendant lured her into having a sexual encounter with him by concealing the fact that he had a venereal disease. Defendant knew of the risk that he would pass the disease to plaintiff if he did not take the appropriate precautions, and when that risk materialized, he manipulated her to protect himself from reputational harm using his status as a licensed attorney. Wow. It explains plaintiff has filed an order to show cause seeking permission to proceed under the pseudonym Jane Doe in order to avoid reputational harm and collateral consequences from public disclosure of her sensitive medical information. Little side note there, as we have seen recently in a number of Sean Combs civil cases, that can be a bit of an uphill battle. Courts recently have ordered anonymous plaintiffs to reveal their identities in these cases, or the cases get thrown out. And this is largely due because there was a failure to properly back up with evidence their arguments for why they should be able to proceed anonymously, like what danger or harm would result if their identities were revealed. But also it was an issue of fairness. So the idea would be, doesn't a defendant have a right to know and investigate and challenge the person voluntarily bringing a lawsuit against them? Side note, moving on to this. Jane Doe says that she connected with Tony Busby online and they struck up a relationship. So she travels to his hometown of Houston for a date. And she says that he took her out to a dinner and then they saw a show. But the complaint states, after the show, defendant invited plaintiff to stay and have a few drinks. And then he arranged for them to spend the night in a 5-star hotel. Defendant seduced plaintiff to engage in sexual activities without disclosing that he had a venereal disease. Soon after her encounter with Busby, Jane Doe says she started to experience some pain, so she went to the doctor. The doctor explained to her that she had contracted an incurable sexually transmitted disease that would affect her for the rest of her life. After receiving the venereal disease diagnosis, plaintiff called defendant to inform him that he had transmitted a venereal disease to her. Defendant was apologetic and unsurprised because on information and belief, he was already aware that he had a venereal disease and that he did not take appropriate precautions to prevent transmission when they were engaging in sexual activities. So according to Jane Doe, Busby told her, "Don't say anything to anyone about the STD." And in exchange, he promised to provide her free legal services as a form of compensation. The complaint reads, filled with shame and grief over her diagnosis, plaintiff continued seeing defendant, the only sexual partner she would not have to inform of her venereal disease test results. Defendant became possessive of plaintiff in an effort to keep her close and manipulate her into keeping his secret. So according to this woman, she was in New York City at one point with a friend when Tony Busby apparently joined them at a bar. And she says when he entered, he saw her talking to a man at the bar. So her lawsuit says, what does he do? She claims he smashed a glass into her face, causing her front teeth to chip. Now, adding to all of this, it appears that during this relationship between 2018 and 2021, Jane Doe was married. She and her husband had started divorce proceedings in 2021, and the plaintiff says that Busby had offered to represent her again for free, promising to fight for her share of the marital assets. So I'm going to read you now a chunk of the lawsuit, which lays out what Jane Doe says Busby did and didn't do while he was representing her. Quote, defendant used his position as plaintiff's sole attorney as an opportunity to doctor plaintiff's medical records to make it look as if he could not have been the one who infected her with a venereal disease. Specifically, defendant falsified the test to show that she contracted the venereal disease in 2020 from her soon-to-be ex-husband, rather than in 2018 from defendant. On April 13, 2021, defendant sent a demand letter to plaintiff's husband with a knowingly fraudulent claim that he, rather than defendant, had infected plaintiff with a venereal disease. Defendant's attempt at blackmail did not work, and plaintiff's husband continued to litigate the divorce. On June 14, 2021, prior to mediation in the divorce proceeding, plaintiff's husband made requests for discovery relating to defendant. Defendant insisted that the divorce settle quickly and without discovery. On information and belief, defendant provided this advice to avoid production of documents that would uncover his fraud and his role in infecting plaintiff with a venereal disease in 2018. At defendant's insistence and direction, plaintiff entered into a divorce agreement that resulted in a dramatic loss for plaintiff, who otherwise stood to recover an equitable split of the marital assets. Defendant also directed that the divorce settlement include an arbitration clause precluding plaintiff from further litigation with her husband. On information and belief, defendant inserted this term to prevent his involvement from being exposed in courts open to the public. Again, wow. If true, that's pretty egregious conduct. Again, both on a moral, human, and legal level, right? I mean, Jane Doe right here, she is suing under multiple causes of action. So first, legal malpractice. Jane Doe alleges by causing plaintiff to agree to a settlement without litigation, plaintiff was forced to accept a settlement far below the amount she was otherwise entitled to. She's also suing for violation of judiciary law, which is when an attorney harms their client by doing something like deceiving them or delaying their case for their own monetary gain. Third, breach of fiduciary duty, which is the responsibility of an attorney to act in the best interest of their client. Jane Doe says Busby didn't do that. He didn't act in her best interest, but rather he just wanted this case to be over with as little evidence presented as possible, according to the lawsuit. So, again, he didn't fulfill his duties as her lawyer. Fourth, fraudulent misrepresentation. The lawsuit reads, but for defendant's misrepresentations, plaintiff would not have entered into the divorce settlement and would not have agreed to any distribution of assets less than what she was legally entitled to under the Texas Family Code. Fifth, tortious interference. And that is when someone interferes with a person's contractual or business relationships in an improper way. In this case, Jane Doe is saying that Busby knew she stood to gain financially, but still sabotaged her to cover up his own bad behavior. And finally, Jane Doe is requesting a declaratory judgment from the court, so an order clarifying someone's rights or obligations here. And she claims that her ex-husband has taken the position that the divorce settlement that Jane Doe agreed to means look, she's not entitled to some of the income that he's recently gotten from assets they acquired together when they were married. Again, Jane Doe says she got bad advice from her attorney and she should be allowed to back out of that settlement agreement. According to the complaint, a declaratory judgment would serve the useful purpose of clarifying and settling any future interpretation of the divorce settlement. So what exactly does something say? What are somebody's rights? So, what does Tony Busby have to say about all of this? Well, he is emphatically denying this, saying it's part of a smear campaign that now he's the subject to, now that he's suing major celebrities like Sean Combs and Jay-Z. In a post on Instagram on Thursday, Busby wrote, "The smear campaign continues. Today I was sued yet again by a lawyer affiliated with the same lawyers I face in the Diddy litigation. The conspiracy to discredit me and intimidate me from pursuing claims in the Diddy litigation has at this point become criminal. This latest case, like the others, is frivolous, laughable, and ridiculous and would be dismissed like the others. It now seems that every other day there's another false claim filed, all of which are being ginned up by individuals working on behalf of or in concert with those Roc Nation and Diddy interests. This latest one is provably false with literally no factual basis or merit whatsoever. Prior to filing it, the lawyer demanded $20 million from me, claiming that if I didn't pay, he would trash my reputation despite being shown that his client's wild claims could not be true. We won't just sit back and allow this criminality to continue. We've reported this conduct to the relevant legal authorities, and we will be filing our own cases against those behind this to put a stop to it once and for all." And by the way, this alleged connection between the attorney for Jane Doe, Jeremy Israel Borer, and any link to Diddy litigation is a little tenuous because based on our research, Borer represents a former deckhand named Matthew Ray Thompson Jr., who was injured when the ship he was on collided with a barge. Thompson is suing Busby because he says Busby's firm committed malpractice during his case and stole money from him. Busby says that the recent lawsuits alleging ethical violations like this, they're again all part of a smear campaign by the Diddy and Jay-Z camps. I will say, it is very interesting that Busby makes the claim that he's being extorted because lawyers for Jay-Z say Busby did the exact same thing to Jay-Z, essentially. According to court records filed on behalf of a John Doe in civil court, who we now know to be Jay-Z, Busby reached out to Jay-Z's people and basically said, "Hey, I'm going to name you in this bombshell lawsuit, so you should settle now or, your reputation's on the line." A hearing is scheduled for February where the attorneys will argue to a judge why Jane Doe should or shouldn't be allowed to proceed anonymously, so we'll see which way this goes. But the drama surrounding Tony Busby, Jay-Z, and all of this continues, and we'll make sure to continue to cover it for you here on Sidebar. But that's all we have for you right now, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please...